little introduction to the program.
Okay, are we ready? 3, 2.
Welcome to our Zen Talk from the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. This is a talk we do, interview, discussion we do every week. And we invite you to attend as often as you can. I think we're streamed live on Mixlr. We are on our Facebook page and are archived on YouTube. So you can follow up anytime you like and listen to any of these talks that you like. We'd also like you to consider in the online audience if you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have somebody you think we should interview. Our interviews are generally about Zen and related subjects. Tonight we have Sule Welch, who will be talking with us about martial arts, which is one of the traditionally associated arts with Zen, especially in Japan. But you can go to asec.org and look up any of our other programs in terms of your own participation and attendance here at the Atlanta Soto Zen Center, or our network of 10 or 12 affiliates, centers around the country and in Canada. So we encourage you to do so, to engage with us in your own practice of Zen. Tonight, we have great fortune to have a guest who is from a martial arts background, and Keisei Andrew Dietz. Dietz will be introducing Sule. And the subject matter will be not so much directly about Zen, but about the martial arts in Zen. My teacher, Matsuoka Roshi, held a black belt in judo. I personally am not trained in any martial arts of any kind, so I plead ignorance on all levels. But I look forward to this interview, and I would think hopefully we'll have some compelling questions for you. So if I can turn it over to Keisei Andrew Dietz, please introduce our guest.
Yeah.
And well, any beginning questions you have.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm so glad you're here, Sule. So I have sensei and sifu, because Sule is not only a sensei, my teacher in Zen tradition, but Sule is my teacher in martial arts, which I've just begun. But very quickly, almost immediately, we began talking about connections between what we do in the dojo and what we do in the Zendo in some ways. But I'll share with you what I know about Sule. We have connections a number of different ways, even before working together, studying. But Sule are you from Atlanta originally?
No.
No. Yeah. But you came here to go to school at Morehouse.
Exactly.
One of the great universities anywhere, but certainly in Atlanta. And then got a master's in business from Georgia State.
Right.
After working with Nations Bank and Coca-Cola Company, and had a great career in marketing with a number of major brands here in Atlanta. Yeah. Before opening your studio, the Welch Martial Art Experience in Sandy Springs, Georgia, and you opened it there in 2003.
Actually, no. I opened the first studio in 2007, and then I moved to the Sandy Springs area where we are currently in 2013.
Okay, got it. And that's your full-time focus now, is building that studio. Yes. and teaching martial arts. And
100%.
We're spending time together on Wing Chun, although you've exposed me to Jeet Kune Do and Kali, and several other words I can't pronounce. No, I think those were the main ones. But you also teach Tai Chi and Capoeira.
Yes, and Hapkido.
So I can't keep up.
Do you have a favorite?
I don't. In the beginning, my favorite was Hapkido because it was the first thing I was exposed to as a child. And fell in love with it and out of love with it because my real first love was soccer. Growing up where I grew up, it was an international city, Washington, D.C. That's where I was born. And then moved out to the suburbs of Virginia. And I tell everyone my fun story or introduction to what made me passionate about soccer. And I'll quickly go back to martial art. was that I had the fortune of meeting Pele when I was a little boy.
Wow.
Wonderful.
He was in D.C. in the late 70s promoting soccer to the nation's capital. His team was the Cosmos. He did a demonstration and found kids in neighboring communities and brought us all in and beat us one by one. So when you're indoctrinated into soccer like that, you love it.
Wow.
You see a guy who's otherworldly in his passion and his craft. And he's probably
Soccer has to be a
20s then.
great physical introduction into the martial arts.
Absolutely.
In terms of, at least in terms of endurance. And
Yes. And that's what I learned later, really later, as in only about 10 years ago. He's still active since, we just had our Olympics in Brazil. They still brought him on the scene, and he talked about what really made his practice of soccer unique, and it was the Ginga, which is the principal movement in capoeira. So he was a capoeirista. Ginga is a flow or swing type movement that they teach in capoeira, and he said that gave him the ability to use elusive footwork on the soccer field. He was growing up with the Ginga as a boy in Brazil.
that's for the audience. What is capoeira?
Capoeira is a Afro-Brazilian martial art that was basically created by enslaved Africans in Brazil, and as they intermixed with Brazilians, became what is now probably the most second popular activity to football. They call it football in Brazil, as an activity of martial art, a culture expression, music. So
I've seen students at your studio, and it looks like dance in a lot of ways.
That's the way they used to disguise it from the slave owners when they practiced on the plantations during their free time. So the word capoeira is short grass area, and that's where they played. So it kind of quickly got its name that way.
Wonderful.
I wanted to, we started off, I mentioned, I have my two teachers here, which is special for me, and I appreciate that. But you have some incredible teachers you've told me about, or at least alluded to. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about those and how they've influenced you.
Yes. The first one that introduced me to Hapkido. Hapkido is the way of coordinated power. It's a Korean word for their art form. It's a sister to Taekwondo, which is probably a little bit more popular since it's on the Olympic scene. But my first teacher was in Hapkido. Still very close to him. His name is John Thomas, and he's located in Reston, Virginia. So he started with me really young, took on all my challenges that I had, including distractions and other things that I wanted to be doing, and was patient with me. And as I went in and out of it, when I finally came back to it, and we talked about it many years later, he just said, you were different, you were ready to do it, but he never hung that over my head. So as a positive influence, he was one really early who met me where I was, continued to encourage me, but also gave me a lot of freedom. And I didn't experience that with my other friends who were into other art forms, who, were in them up to a certain point or a certain belt or for a certain time, and then they quit and they never went back to it. So I like to tell the story. His kind of overarching influence was when I earned my black belt. He gave me the white belt, and in Hapkido, that's your first belt. And he said, now you've proven that you have the ability to learn, go learn something and come back and share it. We'll always be here. And he pushed me to stay educated and pursue education, because I knew then I wanted to be involved in martial art the rest of my life. I probably would have tried to, at that age where you're, 19 and you know everything, open a studio and start doing it the conventional commercial way. And he wasn't, you can't do that. He was like, you should look at these other things. So that was powerful for me. And it opened my eyes to just research. So from that experience, I became what I like to call kind of a martial art researcher. And I started reading a lot of books. Two of the most influential ones were by Danny Inosanto, who was a protege of Bruce Lee. And upon reading his books, I got really interested in Bruce Lee's philosophy beyond just seeing the movies when I was a kid.
Of course.
And then I had the opportunity to come to Atlanta in 1989 and actually meet him, because there was a seminar advertised in Black Belt magazine. That's where we got things then. There was no internet. It's like Vince, two buddies and my parents, that I was just going to borrow their car and drive down here. And my buddies were going to do something else, and I was going to this 3-day seminar. And at that seminar, I met Guru Dan. We call him Guru.
Guru Dan.
Guru. Yeah, or Magulang na Guru is a senior title for a Filipino teacher. And so then he's introduced as Guru Dan. The other 3 people at that seminar were Sifu Francis Fong, who I had heard about in one of Guru Dan's books, and already kind of got my head around I wanted to experience Wing Chun. So I got to meet them both at the same time, as well as Ajahn, which is a title for a teacher in Thai boxing out of Thailand, Ajahn Surchai. Saraswati, or Master Chai. People call him Ajahn Chai.
What's
And,
interesting, your profile of the relationship to the teachers, especially your first teacher in Hapkido, and his willingness to sort of let you find your own path. That's very similar to what we do. We are a branch of Soto Zen, and Soto has a long history going back to around maybe 800 in China, with Dongshan, we call Tozan Ryokai. Tozan is the toe in Soto.
Okay.
And we have Dogen, who went from Japan to China in the 13th century and brought this form of practice, which is really a Chinese form of practice, back to Japan. And then my teacher, Matsuoka Roshi, came over in 1939 from Japan before the war. And he was about 27. I met him when I was in my mid-20s in Chicago. But the approach in Soto is very much similar to what you seem to have been describing, as far as I could tell. That is, we rely on meditation. We rely on following the practice rather than kind of a codependent relationship with a teacher. It's not like that. It's more, it's not exactly casual, but it's more, you're on your own, and I'm here as a coach, you know, and when you get into a blind alley or into a rut, you know, I'm here to help you get out of that.
Absolutely.
And so
Very much the relationship.
I think that's the secret of Soto Zen success. Unlike Rinzai or Tibetan Buddhism and some of the other more ancient forms, where you have to have this extremely live-in kind of relationship with your teacher. It's a little too devotional for Westerners, Americans. You know, so we thrive on this kind of cult of individualism. But so Zen and perhaps the martial arts you have experienced are kind of a middle way.
Yes.
They're not you know, codependent in that level of dependency, but they're also not, you're on your own from the beginning. We're here to help as need be, but you direct your own path, right?
Right.
You take the initiative.
Yes.
And I think this has been the history of Zen, in particular Soto Zen, and 100% plus dependent on the student. The transmission from teacher to student is not really dependent on it. Dependent on the teacher, and the teacher has to get out of the way and know what they're doing. But if the student doesn't have the intensity, you can't do anything with them.
Right.
Sensei, to what degree or in what way do you think the teacher-student relationship has changed in Soto Zen as it moved to America? I know you didn't experience it in Japan, but Matsuoka did.
Well, I'd have gone back to Japan a few times, and the differences, I think, are mainly cultural means. The difference in being a Japanese student growing up, a young man growing up in Japan, your relationship to the whole idea of training in Zen is entirely different from it is here.
Right.
I mean, the Zen here is kind of an option. In Japan, as I understand, for Matsuoka Roshi, his first teacher was his father, who was also a Zen priest. His brothers were also Zen priests. But I think it's a little bit like Catholicism in Italy. You know, one guy is going to be the priest, one son. You know,
Right.
So it's the cultural differences should not get in our way, but we have to recognize them.
That they're there.
Yeah, we're only here 50, 100 years now. And somebody said the first 100 years is the hardest.
I think that's true of martial arts too, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe not even that long.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm curious for what you see or understand to be differences in teacher-student relationships and learning martial arts in, you know, sort of place of origin in China or Japan, and in your case, Brazil and several others as well. But how you see that different here and how you adapt
it is different. I mean, much like Mr. Thomas gave me that freedom, I think subconsciously then I was only drawn to teachers that practice that same way. To go to a seminar and not see one person, but to go to a seminar where 4 people are featured. The 4th person was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stylist. So in no way, shape, or form, especially back then, did you have, I mean, even in my own coming up in Hapkido, you didn't go train at another school. And this is in the early 80s.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily a slap on the wrist, but it was kind of like what am I not giving you that you need to go somewhere else?
Yeah.
And my teacher didn't have that. I mean, he had an open Monday night where anybody could come in with a uniform or not. We were near, military area in Washington. And so some of my best experiences, not only learning, but learning to apply the art in combative ways, were working with guys twice my age who were special ops guys.
You see a little of that.
It was open.
Sort of possessiveness and loyalty issues in Zen sometimes.
Yeah.
And students often will ask me, is it okay if I go practice at another place? If I go to this retreat or session, if I do this. So Matsuoka Roshi was not exactly sanguine about the idea that all the teachers out there are sort of equal,
Right.
Right. He was very critical, as was Master Dogen in the 13th century, of other teachers. But it was mainly their pedagogy and how you could be led astray if you're not careful in certain of these training methods. And frankly, in America and probably in Japan and China, there were teachers who were in it for the wrong reasons, and you can't trust them. And I know that happens in martial arts as well.
Absolutely.
So there's an ethics kind of principle around ethics, and but in general, our sect, at least Matsuoka lineage, is open to our students. Please go practice everywhere else.
Yeah.
And you'll get a perspective.
That's how you grow.
And when you come back here, you'll see what we're doing is not so different, and it's not that unusual either.
Not a secret.
Right? and it's not
right.
And so forth. Well, most of when our students have gotten in trouble, it's because they had tunnel vision. They only practiced here. They didn't get out and go around. So I think this is a very healthy idea that we encourage people to practice with other teachers and don't worry about the loyalty.
Right.
I always say,
it's loyalty to the practice.
Take my students,
right.
Please.
Right. Right.
Yeah, take that's right.
Yeah.
You'd appreciate that.
I do like that. The Rodney Dangerfield.
Right.
Or was that Henny?
Yeah.
Well, that was one
Henny
of Bruce Lee's things. He said there's no such thing as a style. It's the individual. And he preached that at a very unpopular time. I mean, I talk about the 80s. He was saying that in the 60s. And it was very disloyal, dishonorable. I mean, almost like a way to disqualify yourself. And you walk in and challenge. Yeah, and that was common too. But there's file a lawsuit, you had to back it up. Walk in the door, show me what you got.
There's a danger in that because in America, we have all the forms of yoga now, and everybody's claiming their difference. And that's why you should come and take yoga from me and give me your money.
Tai Chi is the same. Yeah.
So in martial arts, it would be similar. And in Zen, could be a little bit like that, I think. But we're so new and so young in the culture that, from my perspective, we have an embarrassment of riches. I mean, we can't possibly serve the demand as it is now.
No.
But in the martial arts, I think the difference is if you think as a young guy or young person, you have this great new style, bring it.
Right.
It's going to be tested in the ring. Right.
So let me just shift a little bit.
Takes a little longer if you're just sitting on a cushion.
Yeah. It's harder to, well, we do have something called Dharma combat.
We do.
Actually.
Okay.
Do you want to describe that?
Do tell.
Yeah. Generally, I sit up in the middle, and it's called Mando, Crossing of Swords, or what do you call it? You step up and you ask a challenging question. And the teacher responds. Then you respond back and forth in front of everybody.
Nice.
And so if
But,
you
but nobody gets hurt.
nobody gets hurt.
Egos gets a little bruised.
It's like
Well, we're supposed to let that go. So
you remember in the
I suppose.
what was the television program with Kung Fu, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When they throw spears at
Yeah.
Sheridan and he'd knock them away.
mhm.
My teacher described it like that. There's a ceremony you go through as what is called shuso, or head student. And at the end of your ango or practice period, you sit up in front of everybody and you've brought a koan for everybody to study beforehand, and they all throw challenging questions at you, and you have to answer them like that.
Yeah.
And it's considered to be similar to that, but it's sort of more. It's not so much physical as mental.
Mind, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use that as a jumping off point. That idea of fluidity, agility, spontaneity seems to be something similar, a similar practice, something we're training in both in Zen and martial arts. I came in one day to your studio and you had a character, Chinese character, I guess, on the board, on your whiteboard for Mushin.
Japanese character.
Japanese character, yeah. Kanji. Is that what?
Yeah, it's a kanji.
Yeah.
No mind.
No mind. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that's for sure a connecting point.
Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. That came up in a Tai Chi class, Chinese class, right? And one of our students is first generation Japanese. She's here. She's been in Atlanta probably 40 years, and she's a statistician, PhD at Georgia State. But still grew up in Japan. So when the class asked me to write the kanji, and I've taken Japanese in college, and I've been to Japan, stayed for about a month or so. I have best friends who live there for years. But I don't do calligraphy well. I said, I'm going to ask Chris when she's in.
Yeah.
Put this on the way. What you saw was very good, right?
Yeah.
I didn't write that. But the concept was, as we were in Tai Chi, practicing choreography, because Tai Chi is a Qigong, right? It's a form of energy exercise. But when you go into Tai Chi, there are 4 styles or forms. There's Chen form, which was the original Chen family. The Yang form came from a derivative of Chen, then Wu, and then Sun. And so what I primarily focus on is Sun. And we were working a part of that form, and people were struggling with it. So the topic came up, what should I be doing? They're trying to define it. Where should my hand be? Where should my foot be? Almost over-analyzing it to the point that you lose the connection to the movement. And we talk about breath in the Dantian and how that should guide movement. And it shouldn't be not just that you don't want to look robotic in a certain way, but if you're focusing so much on this, what about what's moving that? What about balance? What about awareness of your body? And in that class, the average age is probably about 52. My oldest student is 84. And so the concept came up, let go of some of that for a second. See if you can understand the movement. And I use what I call a stepwise teaching method, taught to me by Dr. Lamb, my teacher. Watch me, even for the most experiential learner, who you say, watch, and they watching. No, you're memorizing. You can't just watch.
Right.
And then follow me. And then show me. Not show me as in a test, but show you what you've absorbed. And then we start to work from there. So the concept of Mushin came up in that dialogue. And I said, sometimes there's a time to let go and forget about getting the moves right or what comes before or after. And when you practice that, part of it is learning a move and knowing where the move starts and where it ends. And so the exercise we ended with that day was, because all of them have a handful of moves and everybody's at a different level, there are certain parts in the choreography. I said, I'm going to give you 8 minutes to work on a move and see if you can really work on that one movement, and don't worry about having to do the one before or do the one after. See if you really can kind of empty your cup for a moment and just find some different things about that position, that flow.
So Mushin, from a Zen perspective, Mu means emptiness, Shin's mind, heart mind, would mean something like, from a practical perspective, not being bogged down in chitta, discriminating mind, attached mind,
Analytical mind.
what you're just an analytical mind being caught up in trying to grasp this intellectually,
Yes.
but also the emptiness of mind, or the empty mind, would be dynamic mind. Mu means emptiness, but emptiness is the dynamic principle by which form comes to be. Emptiness, mu, is often set up against form or appearance in classical Buddhism. So being attached to the form would be the opposite of mu, in a sense.
Yes.
So allowing your mind to become empty of that attachment to form allows you to be more dynamic in the flow.
And in your discovery.
You see this in dance as well. My wife had a teacher in Chicago who taught what he called the lacquer method. He was Asian. I can't remember which country he's from. But his students would come in and they danced naked. This was Chicago in the 60s.
Okay.
He would just get up and start dancing. And the idea was you just got up and tried to do what he was doing.
Huh.
And the first time you were very clunky. You couldn't even get close, but the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth.
Yeah.
He described it as like layers of lacquer on the bowl, right? Each layer, you go deeper and you're closer and closer. Well, this is, I think, a very similar principle in Zen. We have the flexibility of mind to imitate our teachers in the beginning and just do what they do and try to, it's like a apprenticeship.
A mirror almost.
Yeah, it's like a mirror.
Yeah.
You just follow what they do and try to do it.
Yeah.
Of course, you guys are moving a lot faster.
Sometimes. Not in Tai Chi.
We have one of our members is Frederick Likud in Dothan, Alabama. He's karate, Tai Chi.
Okay.
And he comes once in a while and does Tai Chi classes for us.
That's awesome.
But it's very similar. He turns his back to you and you just follow him. You try to do what he does.
Yeah.
So one thing, so Mushin, these are kind of ways of being. A lot of the way we practice is about form in a sense, not form and emptiness, but physical posture, breath, and attention. So when we teach newcomers, those are the core three elements. And when we're sitting, zazen, if we're find ourselves straying or feeling pain or whatever might be taking us off center, we come back to posture, breath, attention. And I don't know, but it strikes me that might be there may be some similarities there too. Does that strike a chord?
I'd say those are probably your three core in all martial art. We talk about them. We don't want to quiz you, but there's three, right? Center line, immovable elbow, sinking energy, attaching to the energy coming from the earth, accepting that, adapting it to benefit you, but not in a way that you're trying to do this or that or overcome, but just that it can anchor you. And then from that, you can translate it through the center line of the elbow. In Tai Chi, you have many principles, but they kind of can still be broken down into those 2-3 sets, and then you have little subsets. So you have an outward movement, you have an internal movement, and then you have the breath.
We have a couple of minutes left before we turn to questions from the audience, and I was wondering if you wanted to say anything to the audience to the online audience about your company and what you're doing, where you are, and invite them.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd love to. As Andrew said, we're in Sandy Springs. One of the things we try to let people do is come in through the door of what we call martial fitness. It is a trademark system that I created. And in my mind, I think martial arts still sits over here when it comes to helping you as an individual just heal. You go to a doctor and they give you a prescription, or maybe a more innovative doctor might say, if you're tight or flexible or in a certain physical way that's off, watch your nutrition, take a yoga class, something like that. Nobody says take a martial art or engage in a martial art.
So you're saying it's not about fighting and winning a contest.
And martial fitness is essentially that. There's no partners. There's no striking. There's no pads. There's no sparring. It's a movement practice that I created on the 7 systems I've been training for the better part of 30 years to help people move their body in a different way, virtually equipment free, except for a few other tools we might use, a stick or something. But again, it's no partner based. And you move through 6 stages of fitness.
Would you be willing to come here and demonstrate that for us and put us through that?
I think that would be fun.
I want to warn you that the first time I came, and you had, was it 8 exercises for a minute each?
Yes.
I couldn't walk for about a week.
Then it's working.
This was 8 minutes.
With 30-second break in between.
Okay.
So you're able to self-pace, I would say that, and anyone can jump in at any level.
Let's plan that for here. I wanted to run one thing by you. The Matsuoka he talked about Onami was a very famous sumo wrestler in Japan. And Onami means could never win in competition, but he was never defeated in practice. And so he went to a Zen master to ask what's wrong, And he said, "Well, Onami, your name means crashing waves, like tsunami. It's crashing waves. O means great, venerable." And so he said, "Have you seen the waves?" And Onami says, "No, I haven't seen any waves. I don't know what you mean." He said, "Well, sit here till you do." These stories are always like that.
Right.
So the story goes, Onami sits there overnight, and the next morning, the waves are crashing all around him. He enters the ring, the public ring, and is never defeated again. He becomes a national champion.
Wow.
So what can you tell us about these waves?
They come in.
It's a koan.
Yeah, exactly. Waves, it's a great analogy. They come in, they flow. Sometimes we create them, and sometimes we wait for them to come, right? From the outside. But I think we're all in flow. So I like that portion of it. And where you attach to that or detach from that is going to give you an experience one way or the other.
So I think it's the dynamic principle of mind. And if you are floating in the waves. Yeah. So from the audience, any comments or questions you'd like to bring up for Sule?
I'll go first. So I wanted to ask you about, my name's Tom. Nice to meet you. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned reading a book by Goro, and then you talked a little bit about that there were those Japanese characters, and you talked about the history of that Brazilian art form. So it seemed to me that you've read some, and I wanted to ask you about your sort of literary exploration of martial arts, and if there's any like religious literature, Buddhist or otherwise, or philosophical literature that's really affected you.
Gosh, I read a lot of martial arts stuff and then non-martial arts stuff, but yeah, my entry into learning more, once my teacher kind of opened my eyes to there being so much more to learn, that's what pushed me. I'll confess in the beginning, my passion outside of movement practices is fine arts. So I like to draw and paint, and I would spend more time doing that. I was not an avid reader growing up as a kid. I would tease my brother, like he's the only person who could sit down and read the dictionary and find joy in that. I had to go outside or paint something or draw on something that was his as I was younger. But from that point forward, I started getting more books, getting more magazines about any art form that I could learn about. And then learning about those art forms is where I started to get more into cultural history readings about where these things came from. So it wasn't so much learning a move from a book or learning about a style from a book. And the way Guru Inosanto wrote as an academic, he was a teacher, a school teacher, in addition to being a phenomenal martial artist, it was very research driven. There was many pictures of the people he met and history lessons, because he's a history buff, as there were about, this was from Bruce Lee's notes, this or that, this was my interpretation of that, and then here's how you punch a bag. It was never technical. And so I then started to be drawn to more works like that, which then, as I grew up and had my own means to do it, my parents didn't support any of this, started taking trips to countries to try to get as close as I could to the origins of the things I was reading about. And I've always been kind of led by that. I like to have dialogue and hear people's opinions about things, but if I can get close to the source, that gets me supercharged. So when I got into capoeira, since you mentioned that one, I was exposed to it through a magazine and through a little funny story with a guy I worked with in banking who was practicing some Afro-Brazilian art forms he didn't know the name of with some guys. And one day it was raining outside, and I lived in an apartment complex in Charlotte, North Carolina that had a racquetball court in the parking lot. So where he never allowed me to come check out their practice, and it was a religious practice where they used this form as an exercise. And since I wasn't a part of their religion, he said, you can't do it. Lo and behold, we need a place today. Can we use that? You can use it if I can. Now, this story ended there. Wow. I felt a lot like you. I couldn't walk the next day. And then I was like, I got to do this again. But I never called it capoeira. It took me another 4 years coming back to Atlanta with a Kung Fu brother of mine who was dabbling in it to say, this is what we call it. Let's check this out. And I was like, these moves feel like those ones that we're about to do that I couldn't walk the next day from. We got to do it.
Right.
And then literally 8 months after that, I'm in Michigan talking with my little cousin, probably 15 years younger than me, who was way in to capoeira. He had left high school, moved to California to work with his dad, who was in music, because he went to a workshop with a capoeira master who invited him to come to California thinking he'd never show. That Christmas, he was going to Brazil for a month. And I'm like, sign me up. So I just went for a month.
So anybody else?
You mentioned, my name is Brennan, by the way.
Yes, good to see you, Brennan. Thank you.
You mentioned you have a love for creativity and for the visual arts. You know, we typically apply motion when we create visual media. And could you possibly draw a similarity between the motion of creativity with the motion of martial arts?
Yes, I think they're intertwined, because when you're expressing something physical for someone else to see, it's the same as if you're putting something down in a particular medium. It doesn't matter if it's a more fluid medium like a charcoal or a watercolor or a paint, or something more static like a sculpture. And I think, as we talk about a lot, Andrew and I were talking, one of Bruce Lee's quotes is, it's not necessarily about this or that or how much of something you can accumulate. It, meaning being, is more about hacking away the unessential. So that's how I put those two together.
Yeah, in design and art in general, we think of the process as either additive or subtractive. And I think in meditation, Zen meditation in particular, mostly subtractive. We're not really adding anything. We're trying to take away our confusion, and as things arise, we see through it. And so you get rid of that, get rid of that. So it's more like Rodin cutting the stone away to reveal the sculpture than it is putting clay on the bust to build the armature, on the armature to build the bust.
There's it made me think, Brennan, of gestures, and in drawing, right? We can draw something small, and we have a little piece, and it's a different kind of movement, and it's a different relationship with the paper, the canvas. And if you create big, it's almost whole body, and it's a whole different experience.
I would add to that, I liken it to weaponry. You're painting with an object.
Oh, yeah.
Sword, stick, blade, scarf. In the Filipino arts, we train in 12 areas. And those areas include empty hand, flexible weaponry, static weaponry, long and short weaponry, body, standing, moving on the ground. It's a complete system, projectile.
Bullfighting is one of the examples Matsuoka Roshi talked about.
The circle in a straight line.
Not in that way, but more.
I thought it was running like crazy and trying to hide.
That too. We have one here.
I'm Paul.
Hey, Paul. Thank you.
So I want to go a different direction. One of the to me, there's a dynamic between a practice and a belief system. Right. So the question is, there are reason systems develop. And so is there such a thing as a right or a wrong practice, because one can be accepting, but at what point do you become more and more until essentially you're nothing? You can throw everything into you can throw a bunch of ingredients in, that does not necessarily make a stew. So for you, what constitutes a way as opposed to craziness? Who gets to say what is? Can anyone set themselves up and say, I've studied this and this and this, let's do this? So how does one distinguish authentic? Or if not authentic, I don't want to say right speech, right action. How does one differentiate authenticity from
Dilettantism?
Thank you. Yes, dilettantism. I like that. Yes.
One being the practicer or one being the observer?
As someone who is teaching, in other words, if one sets oneself up, I mean, traditionally in Zen, if anyone set themselves up as a master, probably shouldn't be doing it, right? You should be just like, no, go away, don't bug me, leave me, go study someplace else.
Right.
I'm not interested.
Right.
When one teaches, at what point, when you talk about combining a bunch of practices or studying many different ways, how do you decide which of the Chinese menu to pick?
Yeah. 175 dishes, which one do you like?
Right, and why would someone who's authentic say, you can't do that, that's craziness. That violates all the rules. All right, so for you, in short, is anything wrong for you? Is there a wrong way of doing martial arts?
For me, no. And the reason I say that very definitively is because it's an experience for me first. And if you start with that, I feel like I'm always going to be learning. So the door that I come through to a system, to a culture, is if it needs a label as a martial artist, which I think is a student. I don't walk into an environment as one of 7 different titles I might have that teachers and students and communities have bestowed on me, not ones that I asked for. And when I go in that way, I feel pretty comfortable that I can continue to do that because it's been validated time and time again by the people that are open to me learning in that way. Can everyone do that? Do I advise everyone to do that as a coach, as a leader? Because I really like Sensei's description of that. I don't feel like I'm a master of anything, so to speak, because I think that level of mastery is something we're trying to work on individually for ourselves. It takes force and a whole lot of other things I'm not really interested in to master another person. That internal strength you build through the practice and experiences is what helps you discover your own mastery, which is a lifelong pursuit. We're not going to be here probably long enough to really understand that. I'm fortunate to have a grandmother who I've known my entire life and been very close to, who turns 102 in 3 weeks. Wow. And she's a very sound mind. And we have a lot of conversations about what education is and what it means to be unafraid and what it means to be open. And she's very much in that practice.
Well, let me come at the same question from a little different perspective, from the perspective of your student. Like in Zen, we have Rinzai, Toto, Obaku. Obaku is a small school, but it's known for tailoring the program to each individual student. So it takes a lot of intensity relationship. Soto is known for its emphasis on upright seated meditation as a key thing, where we think that's what Buddha did, and that's where you'll get most of your answers from. Rinzai engages in the koan riddle, challenging the mind logically and so forth. And I think these pedagogies are seen as being appropriate in different cases to different types of students. Atsuoka Roshi was very high on recommending Soto Zen to us in America because Rinzai is a little too driven, too intellectual. We're already too driven, too intellectual. Soto Zen is more villagers, farmers Zen, kind of like dirt under the fingernails kind of thing. So the question would be for students then, how do you determine which of all of the many styles that you're trained in would be appropriate for a given student?
Having the dialogue with them to figure out where they are and asking a lot of good questions in the beginning to get a firm understanding as best as I can. And this isn't a first meeting. And I'll say on record, it always shifts.
And then,
This
People
just
walk
happened
in with one idea.
This just happened with us.
so sometimes when you watch them, you decide, what, this is not going down there. This is a dead end. Let's go this way.
I'll ask them a different question. I really want to help. I want to guide. I don't want to dictate or require a certain
But I mean,
thing.
if you
I'm
watch
not-
somebody, can you
Absolutely.
see right away that this ain't working?
I can see them struggle, and then they need to let me know if it's working,
Yeah.
so to speak. But I really have a quick dialogue in the beginning because, here's the challenge with the information age. People come in and we do analyze a bunch. I'm glad you said that. We've got access to so much information, but I think with the access of that, we know very little, even less than we used to your question, right, Paul? So they come in, they got their list. I need to lose this. I need to gain that. I need to get this.
Do you ever disagree where you say, that's not really what you need? Here's what you need.
Not in that first meeting, because I haven't met them
Not the
yet.
first meeting.
So to your point, yes, I go, okay, try to ask some clarifying questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're honest enough with me at a first
Right.
blush to maybe shift or ask some questions back, but they usually land where they land. And then I go, come in for this first 30 minutes. Then I get to watch and put something with this.
You begin to see that. Then how long do your student relationships last? I have students
Gosh.
who've been my students for 20 years. I mean, over that period of time, you get to know them.
Well, as I mentioned with Mr. Thomas, we're still extremely close. So it's been 32 years.
And he's your teacher?
He's my teacher. My
But
first
with
teacher.
your students, you have those
I
long,
opened my first
long-term?
studio in 2007, and my first student that signed up is still with me. And everyone that signed up at that studio, even though it closed, is still with me.
So in the last couple of minutes, to wrap up, we'd like you to just talk about whatever we haven't talked about, what you would like to say to maybe sum up your recommendation to the listening audience
Okay.
as to how they would approach the same subject and your place in that context.
Okay. First, I'd say thank you for having me. This is
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andrew. It's always great.
And we'd like you to come back like on a Sunday morning. First
Okay.
Sundays are our guest speakers.
Okay. We can try to coordinate that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I got to get permission from the boss.
She can come.
She can
And your
go?
son.
That would be fun. That would be fun. I just encourage the audience and you guys to keep doing what you're doing, to be open, to be curious in a way that really inspires you, not just to get stuff, but get excited. Get excited about learning, get excited about relationships, get excited about your own ignorance, not afraid of it. And I think that will just continue to enrich your life. It's done that for me. I'm not done yet. And so anybody that I can encourage to keep doing that, please do it.
One last question, which may be in the form of a challenge to you. Matsuoka Roshi was a National Advisory Karate Council advisory. He was the advisor to the Chicago Police Department martial arts section. And he encouraged all martial arts dojos to include meditation. And in fact, he claimed that you could have, if you had Zen meditation, you could defeat an opponent who had superior waza or technique skill because you had Zen. What's your position on that, the relationship of meditation to the martial arts?
Breath is a big part of every art form that I've experienced. And even those that I haven't, that I've talked to other people who've experienced other systems, that's where it starts. Not just because we need oxygen, but I mean, being in tune with your breath and not having experienced meditation or Zen at the level that you guys have. That's got to be a key ingredient. So I would agree with him on that. And to be in tune with that is being outside of your physical body in a way that I think most people are a little bit afraid of, either because they don't trust it, they don't get it, or in our culture, frankly, they think it's a waste of time. And that's a trap.
Yep.
Yeah. To disregard that, or to not expose yourself to that, because that is that inner power.
Somebody said the samadhi of action, which is martial arts, is 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times greater than the samadhi of repose, which is sitting meditation. But most people cannot enter into the samadhi of action unless they experience the samadhi of repose.
I tell our youth, martial art is 80% mental.
Yeah. So
20% physical.
Casey, do you have anything else you would like to close with for our guest?
I know that one of your inspirations was Bruce Lee, and to some degree, this is to Paul's question, but I think it's a way to advise our audience on maybe how to take what we've talked about tonight. And there was the comment that I'm going to botch, so I'm going to ask you to say it, about kind of taking what you need and letting go. And
his system that he called the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, which is Cantonese for the way of the intercepting fist, is summarized best by researching your own experience, absorbing what is useful, rejecting what is useless, and adding what is uniquely your own.
And Master Dogen said, examine thoroughly and practice. And Buddha said, don't take my word for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Pleasure.
I've been burning to offer you more tea because I realized that I skipped you.
That's okay. Thank you. A little bit more, if you don't mind. Yeah, a little more.